referenced in heaps of different media, but I have no idea what the Wendigo actually is. My awesome friend JASMR made a video on the Wendigo, and I've always wanted to watch it, but I've never gotten around to watching it, specifically because I've had the request to whisper about the Wendigo on my Whispering Wikipedia list for a while, and I didn't want to spoil my reaction, so I'm doing it today so I can go and watch her video afterwards. Anyway, if you're new here, the point of these videos is for you to relax. I make these videos to help you fall asleep, possibly trigger some ASMR, to not feel alone and know that you're hanging out with me, or to be entertaining so you can learn something interesting and something new. So without any further ado, I'd like to quickly invite you to get into some sort of relaxing position and consider, how do you treat the people in your life? Do you treat them well? I'd like to remind you to treat the people in your life with love and respect, even if it's an online interaction with someone you don't know. Okay, let's start whispering about this interesting thing, the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a mythological creature or evil spirit which originates from the folklore of the First Nations based in and around the east coast forests of Canada, the Great Plains regions of the United States, and the Great Lake regions of the United States and Canada, grouped in modern ethnology as speakers of the Algonquian family languages. The Wendigo is often said to be a malevolent spirit, sometimes depicted as a creature with human-like characteristics, which possesses human beings. The Wendigo is known to invoke feelings of insatiable greed and hunger, and the desire to cannibalize other humans, as well as the propensity to commit murder in those that fall under its influence. I didn't know that's what the Wendigo did. At odds with its portrayal in 20th century and 21st century settler culture, in indigenous representations, the Wendigo is described as a giant humanoid with a heart of ice, a foul stench, or sudden, unseasonable chill might precede its approach, possibly due to long-time identification by Europeans with their own superstitions about werewolves, which we actually did a series on. For example, as mentioned in the Jesuit relations below, Hollywood film representations often label human/beast hybrids featuring antlers or horns with the Wendigo name, but such animal features do not appear in the original indigenous stories. In modern psychiatry, the Wendigo lends its name to a form of psychosis known as Wendigo psychosis, which is characterized by symptoms such as an intense craving for human flesh and an intense fear of becoming a cannibal. Wendigo psychosis is described as a culture-bound syndrome. In some First Nations communities, other symptoms such as insatiable greed and destruction of the environment are also thought to be symptoms of Wendigo psychosis. Now, the etymology. Where does the name come from? The word appears in many Native American languages and has many alternative translations. The source of the English word is Ojibwe. The Ojibwe word Wendigo. In the Cree language it's Wendigo. Also translated or transliterated as Wendigo. Other translations include, please bear with me here, Wendigo, 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 Wendago, Wendiga, Wendago, Wendago, Wendigo, Wedgigo, Widgigo, Weegigo, Widgigo, Wendigo, 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 Wittigo, and Winsigo. A plural form of Wendigoag is also spelled Wendigoag, Wendigoag, or Wendigoag. The Proto-Algonquian term has been reconstructed as Winnetgoa, which may have meant owl. Interesting. The Wetchug is a similar being that appears in the legends of the Athabascan people of the northwest Pacific coast. It too was cannibalistic. However, it was characterized as enlightened with ancestral insights. Let's go to the folklore. This is probably going to be the longest section. I don't know. The description. The Wendigo is part of the traditional belief system of a number of the Algonquian-speaking peoples, including the... Please don't get angry with me because I haven't heard these pronounced out loud before. Including the Ojibwe, the Saulteaux, the Cree, the Naskapi, and the Innu. Although descriptions can vary somewhat, common to all these creatures is the view that the Wendigo is a malevolent, cannibalistic, supernatural being. They were strongly associated with winter, the north, coldness, famine, and starvation. Basil H. Johnston, an Ojibwe teacher and scholar from Ontario, gives a description of the Wendigo. Here's an excerpt. The Wendigo was a gaunt to the point of emaciation. Its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash grey of death, and its eyes pushed portrayed as simultaneously gluttonous and extremely thin due to starvation. That's freaky. The Wendigo is seen as the embodiment of gluttony, greed, and excess. Never satisfied after killing and consuming one person, they are constantly searching for new victims. A Wendigo need not lose the human's powers of cognition or speech, and in some depictions may clearly communicate with its prospective victims or even threaten or taunt them. A specimen of folk story collected in the early 20th century by Lottie Chikokwa Marsden, an ethnographer of the Chippewas of Rama First Nation, in which a Wendigo also exhibits tool use and ability to survive partial dismemberment and auto-cannibalism, reads, "One time, long ago, a big Wendigo stole an Indian boy, but the boy was too thin, so the Wendigo didn't eat him up right away, but he travelled with the Indian boy, waiting for him till he'd get fat. The Wendigo had a knife, and he cut the boy on the hand to see if he was fat enough to eat, but the boy didn't get fat. They travelled too much, and one day they came to an Indian village, and the Wendigo sent the boy to the Indian village to get some things for him to eat. He just gave the boy so much time to go there and back. The boy told the Indians that the Wendigo was near them, and showed them his hand where the Wendigo cut him to see if he was fat enough to eat. They heard the Wendigo calling the boy. He said to the boy, 'Hurry up, don't tell lies to those Indians.' All of these Indians went to where the Wendigo was and cut off his legs. They went back again to see if he was dead. He wasn't dead. He was eating the juice, the marrow, from the inside of the bones of his legs that were cut off. The Indian asked the Wendigo if there was any fat on them, and they said, 'You bet there is. I've eaten lots of Indians. No wonder they are fat.' The Indians then killed him and cut him to pieces. The end of this giant Wendigo." What the heck? Okay, now to human cannibalism. In some traditions, humans overpowered by greed could turn into Wendigos. The myth thus served as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. Other sources say Wendigos were created when a human resorted to cannibalism to survive. Humans could also turn into Wendigos by being in contact with them for too long. Now the taboo reinforcement ceremony. Among the Assiniboine, the Cree and the Ojibwe, a satirical ceremonial dance is sometimes performed during times of famine to reinforce the seriousness of the Wendigo taboo. The ceremony, known as the Wendigo-Gaston Simomwin, was performed during times of famine and involved wearing masks and dancing backwards around a drum. The last known Wendigo ceremony conducted in the United States was at Lake Wendigo of Star Island of Cass Lake, located within the Leech Lake Indian Reservation in North Minnesota. Jesuit Relations reported. Interesting. On the left here they have the original, and on the right they have the translated version. I shall now read to you this excerpt. What caused us greater concern was the news that met us upon entering the lake, namely, that the men deputed by our conductor for the purpose of summoning the nations to the North Sea and assigning them a rendezvous, where they were to await our coming, had met their death the previous winter in a very strange manner. Those poor men, according to the report given us, were seized with an ailment unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people they were seeking. They are afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but have a combination of all these species of disease, which affects their imaginations and causes them a more canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon children, women, and even upon men, like veritable werewolves, and devour them voraciously without being able to appease or glut their appetite, or ever seeking fresh prey, and more greedily the more they eat. This ailment attacked our deputies, and as death is the sole remedy among those simple people for checking such acts of murder, they were slain in order to stay the course of their madness. History gets really weird. I'm not gonna lie, that's weird as heck. Although, in many recorded cases of Wendigo psychosis, the individual has been killed to prevent cannibalism from resulting, some Cree folklore recommends treatment by ingestion of fatty animal meats or drinking animal grease. Those treated may sometimes vomit eyes as part of the curing process. One of the more famous cases of Wendigo psychosis reported involved a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta named Swift Runner. During the winter of 1878, Swift Runner and his family were starving, and his eldest son died 25 miles away from emergency food supplies at Hudson Bay Company Post. Swift Runner butchered and ate his wife and 5 remaining children. Given that he resorted to cannibalism so near to food supplies, and that he killed and consumed the remains of all those that were present, it was revealed that Swift Runner's was not a case of pure cannibalism as a last resort to avoid starvation, but rather a man with a Wendigo psychosis. He eventually confessed and was executed by authorities at Fort Saskatchewan. This is the most insane Wikipedia page. Another well-known case involving Wendigo psychosis was that of Jack Fiddler, an Oshikri chief and medicine man known for his powers at defeating Wendigos. In some cases, this entailed killing people with Wendigo psychosis. As a result, in 1907, Fiddler and his brother Joseph were arrested by the Canadian authorities for homicide. Jack committed suicide, but Joseph was tried and sentenced to life in prison. He ultimately was granted a pardon, but died 3 days later in jail before receiving the news of his pardon. Fascination with Wendigo psychosis among Western ethnographers, psychologists, and anthropologists led to a hotly debated controversy in the 80s over the historicity of this phenomenon. Some researchers argued that essentially Wendigo psychosis was a fabrication, the result of naive anthropologists taking stories related to them at face value without observation. Others had pointed to a number of credible eyewitness accounts, both by Algonquians and others, as evidence that Wendigo psychosis was a factual, historical phenomenon. The frequency of Wendigo psychosis cases decreased sharply in the 20th century as boreal Algonquian people came into greater and greater contact with European ideologies and more sedentary, less rural lifestyles. In his 2004 treatise, Revenge of the Wendigo, on disorders and treatments of the behavioral health industry in the United States and Canada that are peculiar to Indigenous people, James Burgess Waldron wrote, another excerpt, "No actual cases of Wendigo psychosis have ever been studied, and Lou Morano's scathing critique in 1985 should have killed off the cannibal monster within the psychiatric annals. The Wendigo, however, continues to seek revenge for this attempted scholarly execution by periodically duping unsuspecting passers-by, like psychiatrists, into believing that Wendigo psychosis not only exists, but that a psychiatrist could conceivably encounter a patient suffering from this disorder in his or her practice today. Wendigo psychosis may as well be the most perfect example of the construction of an Aboriginal mental disorder by scholarly professionals, and its persistence dramatically underscores how constructions of the Aboriginal by these professors have, like Frankenstein's monster, taken on a life of their own." Quite a controversial statement, but I guess the debate is very important to have. The 10th revision of the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, the ICD, classified Wendigo as a culture-specific disorder, describing it as rare historic accounts of cannibalistic obsession. Symptoms included depression, homicidal or suicidal thoughts, and a delusional compulsive wish to eat human flesh. Some controversial new studies question the syndrome's legitimacy, claiming cases were actually a product of hostile accusations invented to justify the victim's ostracism or execution. Interesting. As a concept or a metaphor, in addition to denoting a cannibalistic monster from certain traditional folklore, some Native Americans also understood the Wendigo conceptually. As a concept, the Wendigo can apply to any person, idea, or movement infected by a corrosive drive towards self-aggrandizing greed and excessive consumption, traits that sow disharmony and destruction if left unchecked. The Ojibwe scholar Brady DeSanti asserts that the Wendigo can be understood as a marker indicating a person imbalanced both internally and toward the larger community of human and spiritual beings around them. Out of equilibrium and estranged by their communities, individuals thought to be afflicted by the Wendigo spirit unraveled and destroy the ecological balance around them. Chippewa author Louise Edrich's novel The Round House, winner of the National Book Award, depicts a situation where an individual person becomes a Wendigo. The novel describes its primary antagonist, a rapist whose violent crimes desecrated a sacred site, as a Wendigo who must be killed because he threatens the reservation's safety. In addition to characterizing individual people who exhibit destructive tendencies, the Wendigo can also describe movement and events with similar negative effects. According to Professor Chris Shedler, the figure of the Wendigo represents consuming forms of exclusion and assimilation through which groups dominate other groups. This application allows Native Americans to describe colonialism and its agents as Wendigos, since the process of colonization of colonialism ejected natives from their land and threw the natural world out of balance. DeSanti points to the 1999 horror film Ravenous as an illustration of this argument, equating the cannibal monster to American colonialism and a manifest destiny. This movie features a character who articulates that expansion brings displacement and destruction as side effects, explaining that manifest destiny and Western expansion will bring thousands of gold-hungry Americans over the mountains in search of new lives. This country is seeking to be whole, stretching out its arms and consuming all it can, and we merely follow. For a more detailed exploration, visit his book, Columbus and Other Cannibals. Interesting. As a concept, Wendigo can apply to situations other than some Native American European relations. It can serve as a metaphor, explaining any pattern of domination by which groups subjugate and dominate or violently destroy and displace. Joe Lockhart, English professor at Arizona State University, argues that Wendigos are agents of social cannibalism who know no provincial or national borders. All human cultures have been visited by shape-shifting Wendigos. Their visitations speak to the inseparability of human experiences. National identity is irrelevant to this borderless horror. Lockhart's ideas explain that Wendigos are an expression of a dark aspect of human nature, the drive towards greed, consumption, and disregard for other life in the pursuit of self-aggrandizement. Romantic scholar and documentarian Emily Zaga, also a professor at Arizona State University, observes that two commonalities among the indigenous cultures of the Algonquian language family speakers are that they are situated in climes where harsh winters are frequent and may be accompanied by starvation. She states that the Wendigo symbolically represents three major concepts. It is the incarnation of winter, the embodiment of hunger, and the personification of selfishness. Interesting. Very lastly, the last thing we talk about the Wendigo in popular culture. Although distinct from how it appears in the traditional lore, one of the first appearances of a character inspired by or named after a Wendigo in non-indigenous literature is Algernon Blackwood's in 1910 short story, The Wendigo. Joe Nazea wrote that Blackwood's subtly demonizing rhetoric transforms the Wendigo from a native myth into a descriptive template for the Indian savage. Blackwood's work has influenced many of the subsequent portrayals in mainstream horror fiction, such as August Derleth's The Thing That Walked in the Wind and Ithaca, which in turn inspired the character in Stephen King's novel Pet Sematary, where it is a personification of an evil, ugly, grinning creature with yellow-grey eyes replaced by ram's horns, white vapour coming from its nostrils, and a pointed, decaying yellow tongue. These works set the template for later portrayals in popular culture, at times even replacing the Native American lore. In an early short by Thomas Pynchon, Morality or Mortality and Mercy in Vienna, the plot centres around a character developing Wendigo syndrome and going on a killing spree. A character inspired by the Wendigo appears in American comic books published by Marvel Comics, created by the writer Steve Englehart and artist Herb Trimp. The monster is a result of a curse that afflicts those who commit acts of cannibalism. It first appeared in the Incredible Hulk issue 162 and again in the October 74 issue. Without explicitly using the term, the 1995 novel Solar Storms by Jigsaw author and poet Linda K. Hogan both explored the mythology of the Wendigo and used the creatures as a device to interrogate issues of independence, spirituality, and politics, an individual's relationship to the family, and as a metaphor for corporate veracity, exploitation, and power, viewed as a form of cannibalism. Other creatures based on the legend or named from it appear in various films and television shows, including Dark Was the Night and Ravenous. Television series include Teen Wolf, Supernatural, Blood Ties, Charmed, Grimm, and Hannibal, where an FBI profiler has recurring dreams or visions of a Wendigo that symbolises the titular cannibalistic serial killer. A Wendigo appears in the DuckTales Christmas special, Last Christmas, in which the creatures are described as poor souls turned into monsters by obsession and desperation. A Wendigo also appears in the 2020 horror film The Retreat. In 2015, horror survival video game Until Dawn by Supermassive Games features Wendigos as the main antagonists. And in 2018, Fallout 76 by Bethesda Game Studios, Wendigos are featured as one of the cryptid enemies found in the area of Appalachia, mutated from people who consumed human flesh in isolation. Very interesting. Now, towards the end of this video, you probably started to hear a high-pitched whirring sound. I'm very sorry about that. My neighbours have an air conditioner unit right outside my bedroom window and it is awfully loud. So I'm sorry if that is distracting for you. But regardless, I found this Whispering Wikipedia super incredibly fun. I really enjoyed reading this one. Thank you so much to everyone who's been supporting me recently, for all of your lovely comments, and for those of you who support me on Patreon. I really am really happy about all of the, positive feedback I've been getting recently, and for those of you who are having a really hard time right now, I know I've gotten a few messages and seen a few comments from you. There are multiple of you that have really hard things going on, and I just want you to know that, if you're still here, I really care about you guys, and I think about you heaps, and your safety is, very personally important to me. I check the comments and messages every day to make sure that, you know, you guys are alright. So, yeah. Anyway, please take care of yourselves. I'll see you all very soon, and I love you so much.